Welcome to another lunch with Philip and Greg. Today is just a little bit different because we only met Thomas Quinn last week, and so we started a conversation at a meetup and decided that it would be great to get to know him further over lunch. So welcome, Tom.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. Now I noticed on I think I've got the right Thomas Quinn on IMDb that your IMDb credits seem to start about 2001.
Yeah, right, 1999 actually.
Yeah, that seems to be, latish in the career, but let's sort of, what is it you do now then? What are those credits for, and what have you been doing for that 15 years or so?
Okay, for about 16 years I've been a writer, director, producer of documentaries for cable television. Mostly Discovery Channel, History Channel, Science, American Heroes, Discovery Military, working on something for Discovery ID right now, occasionally BBC, once Nat Geo. And so a variety of shows I do for them.
Okay.
And my specialty is really exotic travel.
All right.
And also...
what a great thing to specialize in.
And historical recreations. Yeah, you get to do a lot of traveling on other people's dimes. I even had so many miles built up after a while I was outraged when I had to pay for my own plane tickets. It was like, what? People pay for these things? So you do a lot of travel in places that I would normally never go. The mountains of Mexico, the jungles of Borneo, the Shetland Islands, for Viking fire funerals and things like that. We shot a Discovery Shark Week show down in New Zealand and in the Bahamas. So I've done a lot of that kind of stuff. And then also I've done dramatic recreations is the other thing that I specialize in. And so a number of the shows that I've done are things like Beyond the Da Vinci Code, where we kind of recreate the alternative history that Dan Brown paints in the Da Vinci Code, and we do the whole recreation of the whole thing, and we shot it on location in France and England, and get to do just to sort of reenact all these things on location, so we have as much authenticity as possible. Mm-hmm. And we hire local groups and stringer crews and things like that to sort of put together the local theater companies who have the costumes and the actors and everything like that, and then our skeleton crew comes over and shoots it all. And so it's been a great opportunity just to see these places.
Those local drama groups love the opportunity to do something serious. I used to do a lot of docudrama for my own production back in Australia when I still did a lot of training production. Yeah. And so we'd do a lot of reenactments, and I got to know a lot of local actors fairly well, and some really good talent who never go beyond their local area. For family reasons or other, they're never going to travel, they're never going to go to a big theatre town. Right. So they express themselves in their local theatre production. So when they get a chance to do something other than yet another production of Name Your Famous Play, then I always found they enjoyed that.
Well, we were down in Foix, France, which is in central southern France, and they have a big castle down there, and there's a theater company that does like live shows in front of the castle with knights and fighting and all this kind of stuff, and a lot of our story took place in the Middle Ages. So by hiring this theater crew, we had the location, the castle, they had already their costumes and their routines and everything already worked out, so it was a one-stop shopping for a recreation crew. And we just came there and shot it, and our director choreographed everything. And we ended up getting 2 Emmy nominations out of the show. I got one for writing and one for producing. So that was our big claim to fame there.
So the logistics of working on location in these different countries, it sounds just incredibly easy.
Yeah, it's a snap.
Yep.
Yeah, especially in Borneo, where there's like nothing. No, what you have to do when you do location shooting is you have to kind of mentally walk yourself through the scene that you're going to be shooting. And the situation you're going to be shooting, so that you can try to anticipate everything. Because once you're out there, you can't just send off for a backup camera or extra video or whatever. You got to have everything there. It's like camping, with a film crew, and so you have to basically anticipating is what it's all about. And even no matter how thoroughly you think of things, there's always going to be something that you didn't think of. Like when we went to Borneo, we shot a segment called the Headhunter Trail. And we actually hiked along the trail and stayed overnight with these people whose grandparents had been actual headhunters. And nicest people you ever want to meet, Most of them vegetarians. But their grandfathers had actually been headhunters from a century ago. And so we stayed with them, the Dayak people, on their longhouse on the river in the jungle. And we had a great time. They all served us their home-brewed moonshine, which was killer stuff. So we ended up shooting these guys out in the middle of the jungle there but you have to have absolutely everything with you because there's no electricity, so you can't recharge your batteries. You have to really ration your recording time, whether you're doing chips or we were doing videotape at the time.
We have a friend, it was a recent lunch with Philip and Greg, not yet published when we recorded this one, but she is heading into the jungle of Peru as we talk to do a whole lot of survival training video. And so she's been going through these exact issues in the last couple of weeks.
So you really have to think ahead of time. And despite everything we thought of, it was foolish in a way because it was kind of my fault. We thought of every technical thing we needed in terms of lights and batteries and cameras and supplies and everything else. What we didn't anticipate was that as we were going along the trail, we hit a few rivers that were very shallow, and our boats, we were in these long boats, and we couldn't get across because the water was so shallow in spots, so we had to get out and ford across the river. Well, that means our boots got soaking wet. Our guide had an extra pair of shoes to put on once we got out of the river so she could walk in dry shoes. Our crew didn't know that. We ended up hiking through the jungle in wet boots.
That is not going to be good.
Our cameraman just had these awful calluses by the end of it. We were so sweaty that my thighs were chafing on my pants after I had to put patches over the blood. And in the middle of all this, we have to shoot a fake headhunter attack. We had some of the local guys dress up as headhunters and attack. And then we also went and shot at the world's largest bat cave, which is in the side of a mountain. It's a cave the size of the Astrodome. It's so big you can't see the ceiling from the inside. It just disappears into black. And there are 2 million bats that live in this place. And you could just kind of hear them humming and twerping up above you. And then every night around twilight, what we did was we went about 100 yards into the cave and then pointed the cameras outward towards the mouth of the cave, right? So you see all the stalactites silhouetted against the sky. And then swarms of bats would come out and they would swim in a circle like a donut for about 45 seconds, and then they'd trail off into the jungle to go to feed that night. And then another batch would come out and swirl for about a minute and then go off. And this went on for about a half an hour every night as shifts of these bats circle in circles and then fly out. And on top of all of that, when you're in the cave and looking out and you see the outline of the cave, on the left-hand side of the cave is a totally natural rock formation that looks exactly like a silhouette of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, like Mount Rushmore perfect. It looks like somebody carved Lincoln's silhouette 50 feet high on the wall of the cave. So we're there in this cave, the size of the Astrodome, looking at Abraham Lincoln's silhouette with bats flying in front of him, in the middle of Borneo, going, does it get any weirder than this? It's just, and that's the kind of fun, that's the kind of excitement that I like with the kind of job I get to do. Right. Stuff you don't even expect when you leave. But as we learned with the shoe thing, no matter how much you anticipate, there's always going to be something you forget. So you just got to be ready.
Yeah. Sounds like a really fun job, and I mean, how do you get a job that gets you traveling around the world on somebody else's dime?
Well, I broke into the business into a really good company. What I did was, I'm a classic example of somebody who had no ties with the business at all. My family's from back east. I came out to California all by myself and didn't even go to college for film. I was going to be a lawyer and then decided to go into a more honorable profession. So I went into television. And it turns out there's lots of lawyers in television. So what I did was to break in, basically, I went to film school at the American Film Institute and got my master's degree there. And afterwards, I was a script reader for the studios. And I was trying to write the great American screenplay. And so I wrote about a dozen screenplays, and I optioned 2 of them and got 1 produced. And I don't want to say they did a bad job with it, but the American Film Institute Film Preservation Board is going to have it transferred to flammable nitrate stock. Okay? So, that's my big claim to fame as far as my feature. But so I worked for Steven Spielberg and for Robert Zemeckis, reading scripts for them, for Universal and Paramount and all those guys. And then that was around the era in the 90s when History Channel and Discovery Channel were really kind of coming into their own and really getting big. And I looked at that and thought, I'm kind of mediocre at this feature writing stuff, but the documentary stuff, it feels very second nature to me. So what I did was I got a camera and a public access TV editing system and just went out and shot my own faux documentary. I hosted it, wrote it, shot it, everything, cut it together, about a half-hour show, on something called Media 100.
Oh, we love Media 100.
That was how I learned editing.
That was how I became internet famous.
Okay, there you really.
We did the only training manual for Media 100 called the Media 100 Editor's Companion. It was a compendium. You flipped the pages over so it stood up by itself because what edit bay's got enough room to.
Exactly.
And so it was all step by step to go through everything you needed to do in a Media 100. And we tried to do it a random access index before there was anything like random access.
Exactly.
So it was indexed on every word.
That was a great NLE for people who hadn't come up through the editing system.
Exactly. I mean, I learned editing on 16 millimeter,
Right.
With the editing block and everything else. But in terms of electronic editing, that was Media 100, and it was so intuitive that it was just great. It was just awesome. This was back when Avid was very push-buttony,
In many ways, I think Final Cut Pro 10 reminds me of Media 100 because it has that intuition about it.
Exactly. It's that intuitive. And so I learned on that. And so I got my first job as a writer-editor rather than a producer based on this half-hour home video thing that I produced. It was called Ends of the Earth. It was a collection of stories of how the world was going to end. And I thought it would make a good pitch for a series. Right. And I sent it out to like 30 different companies. I got a response from like 5. 3 of them said no. 2 said come in for an interview, and 1 of them gave me a job. And that's how I broke in. And the job was basically, there was a show called Beyond Bizarre, which was on Discovery Channel. And what they would do is they would film bizarre stories from around the world, send the video back, and they would give me a stack of videotapes and say, here, make a 10-minute segment out of it. And so I would write it up and edit it and make the segments and then send it off to Discovery. And that was my first job. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then eventually we got a renewal of the series under a new name. And I got kicked up to be the writer-producer of the series. And somebody else did the editing. And so that's how I became a writer-producer and director. What happened was that I spent the next decade producing shows, 4 years for this company, which had done a lot of nature and travel and exotic travel kind of shows. So I kind of cut my teeth on a show that was very much into foreign travel and adventure and, people drinking blood and, headhunters and what have you, right? And so I was fortunate enough to get in on that kind of an adventure kind of company. And I spent the next decade producing, but I had forgotten how to edit by then because I was producing all the time, during which time Media 100 went the way of the dodo bird.
It's still available.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's part of Boris Effects now, and Boris is curating it and still releasing new updates to it, but it's very much a minor player these days.
But about 3 years ago when Final Cut 10 came out, I thought, oh, you know what? I want to get back into editing, so I got this. And the good thing is that I didn't have to unlearn Final Cut 7 in order to jump into 10. It had been so long since I had done editing that it was easier for me to start from scratch with a new system than to constantly have my instincts fighting me because I keep trying to do things the way Final Cut 7 did. So I was kind of at an advantage there.
You've obviously talked to some Final Cut 7 editors who've tried to...
Well, the thing is, I ordered Final Cut 7, or Final Cut 10, back when they just released the core program, right? Because I think their strategy was, well, the pros may not like it, but we want to get, there's 5 times as many amateurs out there using iMovie. Yeah. Let's get it into them, sell it to them first. So they put out the core program before you could do anything else, before you could export EDLs or anything, And so the pros are thinking, this is useless. But it's like, no, relax. They're going to add the other modules to it eventually. They're just getting this thing out now to get it to the amateur market. And so I bought the core program and learned all the basics on it. And then as they added more stuff, it became more available. I don't sell myself as a professional editor. I would be like a rough cut editor. Right. I could get it 90-95% in shape, to get the style, the flow, the shape, and all that. And then you bring in the online guy to really polish it and do all the tech specs and bring it home. And that's what I would do. And so there's a couple things on Final Cut 10 I think it's possible to do, but I'm not sure yet. Okay. So it's still, maybe you can answer it after we do this. You can help me out.
Fairly closely involved with Final Cut 10 since the very start.
Okay, there's just like 2 questions or so I've got that I'll talk to you about afterwards. But
yes, it's been very much part of our history. We and funnily enough, we've ended up being part of Final Cut Pro 10's history. Final Cut, we had a booming business, burgeoning business really in Final Cut 7 software for fitting it into professional workflows, doing automatic syncing of double system sound and stuff like that. Well, Final Cut 10 was announced and our business evaporated overnight, and so half our business just went away. And so by the time Final Cut 10 was released, we were feeling the effects of that, 3 months of no software sales. And so I had a 1 week preview. Apple had given me an advanced look at it. I'd written my blog posts and everything by the end of the Wednesday. Jumped in on the Thursday and thought, I can write that book on metadata that I've been thinking of writing, because Final Cut 10 is so metadata centric. And so it fitted my mindset beautifully. And so I sat down and wrote a little book called Mastering the Metadata Foundations of Final Cut Pro 10, released it as a PDF 5 minutes after Final Cut Pro 10.
I want a copy of that book. Metadata just,
a lot of that pretty much all the content of that book is migrating to a website called metadata.guru, which is open and free to everybody.
Oh, awesome.
I want to make that the place to go for metadata information.
That's great.
So that then turned out to be inspirational to Glenn Ficarra, who's one of the co-directors and co-editors of Focus.
Okay.
And that was influenced them to try Final Cut 10, which of course is the big success story for Final Cut 10 as a studio feature film.
Right.
And in the meantime, we've made the translation tools between the old and the new and the new and the old. And so a whole set of tools that allows Final Cut to be used in the feature film market and high-end television market. So we have quite a history with Final Cut 10.
Now, I also recently got Motion, which I haven't learned yet because I just haven't gotten around to it. But I'm wondering, in terms of just practical usage, would it be better to skip Motion and just go to After Effects and learn that, or would it be better to kind of go to Motion? I mean, there's sort of pros and cons.
Good question.
Yeah.
Really good question.
And reading on the internet, you end up with a 50-50 decision.
We've talked about this a lot. It's a completely different mindset, because the people who want to go from Final Cut 10 to After Effects are people who are thinking about wanting to be able to sort of finish things, add sort of pretty title.
High-end motion graphics work. I mean, that's where After Effects really shines. It's a very mature program. It's probably best of breed. It's deep. It's
like Photoshop. It's just got endless layers.
Endless layers that you can it's got expressions. It's got tight integration with Cinema 4D. I mean, if you want to do motion graphic design and you want to be serious about motion graphic design at an affordable level, then After Effects is the way to go.
Whereas I think the attitude for Motion is that you start in Motion and you can create your graphics package.
Right.
And you publish parameters which become visible in the inspector in Final Cut 10.
Okay.
And so then you can do things like you can create a look. So you've got your lower thirds and your opening titles and your bumpers and whatever, and they're all going to look congruent. And you, as the editor, just deal with that in Final Cut 10. You don't even have to worry about it.
So you create your own additional package of title options. In other words, Final Cut 10 has its own prefabbed ones, and then you can simply add your own to it, and then yank those when you need them.
Every title, every transition, every generator are all Motion templates, and Motion and Final Cut share the same rendering engine underneath. And so there's a lot of third-party templates, and I tend to simply buy an opener.
And is it just for titles, or is it graphics and other maps and things like that?
All of that sort of stuff. Yeah, I mean
transitions.
Third parties create a lot of stuff too.
So it's worth learning. Yeah. Okay. All right.
You can do a lot of stuff in there, but a lot of stuff comes prepackaged for very inexpensive.
Well, that's the other thing. Is stuff a lot better than I could ever put together is already there a lot of times. Liquid effects and all this kind of stuff.
We're doing another show called the Semi-Serious Foodies. So that one's a little bit more serious. We want to have an opening for that. And so I went to motionvfx.com. I bought a package that includes about a 25-second opener, high production value opener, matching music with it. So I just drop in my elements and my text. And then it comes with a matching transition, a matching lower third, and a matching title.
Wow.
So for $50.
That's great.
So I mean, could I do that in 20 minutes? Hell no.
So maybe Motion is a good thing to learn first, and then if I decide to get more serious about it, go to After Effects.
If you want to do a lot more custom motion graphics, I think that's what Greg was referring to.
Which is unlikely for me because I'm not a graphics person. I'm a producer, writer guy.
That's where Motion's probably a better fit. If you want to create custom graphics packages for an editor to use, is what Motion does very, very well. What After Effects does is create high-end custom motion graphics that enhance the whole program.
Got it.
So it's more for that custom one, although Adobe are trying to templarize a lot of After Effects stuff, moving title templates into the main editing application, so the editor doesn't have to go out to After Effects.
Okay. All right, I learned something here today. Good.
One of the things that's constant in my thinking is the democratization of this industry, where we've gone from very little production at the high end and very limited distribution to where we can produce television-grade production quality on a table in a restaurant.
That's right.
How much has that democratization affected the industry where you work?
It hasn't affected it a whole lot, except to the extent that I suppose I could say that it helped me break in. Because I could afford my own, at the time it was Hi8 video that I did this with, but because it was affordable video, and I was working at a public access station at the time, so I had availability of their editing system that only a few years before would have been prohibitively expensive. And so that was sort of the first step towards democratization of the industry that helped me produce my own little project for $1,000 or $2,000 that got me to break in. Today it's even cheaper and even easier. You can have higher production value than what I was able to do. So in that sense, it's helpful to break in or to get something done or to show your stuff. I'm not a big believer in the idea that because we have cheap video and cheap editing and so forth, that we're going to suddenly create a generation of Steven Spielbergs or Alfred Hitchcocks. My feeling is the typewriter did not produce a generation of Shakespeare's, or of Hemingway's. So the technology, a producer once, or executive producer once told me about how he goes, well, we got the producer, we got the director, and I said, what about the writer? He goes, well, we can take care of that, anybody can write. And I said, no, anybody can type. But just because you have the technology to make it easier doesn't mean you're any good at it.
Yeah.
And so I think you still have that process of some people just have a talent for it.
Yes.
Some people put in the time to learn it. Some people don't. And some people, no matter what you do, they don't see what you need to see to do something professionally. The one thing that drives me crazy in the high def era is what I call squishy vision. Which is when you take a standard def image and pull it out for 16:9.
Yes.
And half of everybody, every bar, every wherever watches squishy vision, right? Sports and everything. And it's like, can you just adjust the thing? And like they refuse to do it. They say, no, it looks perfectly fine.
We've paid for those pixels. We want to see them lit up.
Yeah, well, and it's just like, no, it's not fine. It's everybody's short and fat.
Yep.
And I even saw this at American Film Institute event, where they were projecting classic movies in squishy vision. And I said, of anybody who ought to have reverence for the proper aspect ratio of the frame, it's the American Film Institute. You ought to show it in the original format. And to me, it drives me nuts. I can't watch a movie in squishy vision. No. So that's the bane of my existence today.
And vertical video.
Yes, right. This way, not this way. Come on. You guys have been watching TV your whole lives. Nobody ever shoots like that.
For a good reason, too.
Yeah. So some people just see this stuff and others don't. You have an eye for it or you don't. And I came into the industry through writing. That was my strength.
Right, yeah.
That's right.
That was where I had put, I started out as a writer and then a writer editor and then a writer producer. And it's still a great way to get to the heart of the business. Because while everybody pays attention to the shooter, because you got to have the camera, everybody attention to the director because he's the maestro of everything.
Right.
If you got a blank page, you got nothing to work on.
That's right.
And so it all begins with the writing. The writer is the way, dictates what everybody else has to do. And so it's a real good way of getting into the heart of the process. And if you're a writer-producer, that means you're sort of bookending the project. You sort of give the material everybody has to respond to, and then you make sure they respond to it properly, and you sort of, got them surrounded. And that way you can control what your director and what your shooter are doing. And they're going to add their own stuff, which is what you should, as a producer, do. Bring out the best of everybody, and don't dictate how they have to do everything. Say, this is the general direction we're going. What can you add to it? What can we polish? And the editor's going to add some flourishes you never thought. The shooter's going to add something. The director's going to add something. And all that stuff adds up to something more than what you had originally hoped. Right. If the magic clicks together. And the writer-producer are the sort of brackets that all that happens within. Right. Writer's the first beginning of the process, and the producer's the end of the process. So that's a good way of kind of getting in control of everything. And then if you don't have money for a director, you hire yourself as a director, and then you direct.
I don't know that if you've seen the movie Focus. It's the first major big budget film that was cut on Final Cut 10. But the interesting thing about that is that the team that did it, it's two guys, and they were right. They wrote it, they directed it, and then they even, because of being on Final Cut 10, they even took various scenes and edited it themselves as well. So that's the kind of, all-in-one kind of solution.
Yeah.
You start at the very beginning and you're
Editor
there.
plus.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
And finished titles. I mean, the movie's release titles were done in Final Cut 10 because it's all vector.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's great also is that a lot of stuff now, particularly that what I do for people, is internet stuff, where you don't have to worry about getting all your broadcast specs.
Yeah.
As long as it looks good and sounds good, that's all you care about. Right. So you can even shoot stuff on a prosumer camera as long as you have, as long as you have focus control and iris control, and as long as you can control those factors, shoot it, cut it, put it all together in a package, put it out, and it's perfect on Vimeo, YouTube, or somebody's personal website. And for 90% of the time, that's all you need.
Yeah.
And since a lot of them never learn formally the stuff in school, you can bring your training to the prosumer equipment.
Yeah.
In a way that that amateurs can't. Amateurs just don't know how to frame a shot, or they don't have a lighter shot, or whatever. And so it keeps me busy.
How much of the technology change then has affected the way you do your job?
Ooh, good question.
It's made it more demanding, because when studio executives know that you can do more, they want you to do more. Right. So it used to be that a rough cut was really a rough cut. It's like you get a general gist of how the thing's going. Then you do the fine cut pass, and okay, now we get to really see what the show's going to be like. And then you do the polish cut, the final cut. Nowadays, the rough cut has got to be like 90% finished, 90% fine cut. And then the fine cut's got to be almost perfect, and then you do the final polish. So it's made rough cuts a lot more demanding.
One of the panels at Editor's Lounge, which Alpha Dogs host most months of the year, one of the panelists said that the worst thing that happened to editing was Avid's Media Composer, because producers learned how quickly you could make changes and how easily you could make changes, and how much faster you could get to the rough cut. So they therefore expected things to a job that used to take 3 weeks now is expected in 1 week, and you know damn well that in 5 years from now you're going to be doing it in 3 days.
That's right. It's called the Peter principle. That the work expands to fill the time allotted for it. Yeah. Right. So if they found out, like in the 1980s, when everybody went from typewriters to PCs, they found out that the average business letter, which used to go through 2 drafts, now goes through 6 drafts, because you can. Yeah. And the same thing is true with editing, where now they demand more, faster, fancier, more shock cuts or whatever, just because you can do it.
Yeah, and when you're in an offline suite, 2 3/4-inch machines, you're not doing dissolves and picture-in-picture and titling. You're doing purely focused on story. Yeah. Now you're expected to do all of this.
Oh, they want it all to where it gets too much. It get the MTV effect, where suddenly everything is a music video, shock, boom, slam, bang, and it's like, slow down and let us get into the show a little bit here. And I worked on one show. I wrote this 8-part series called The History of Man. It was a British series, and they had the South Africa crew do these awesome recreations of Cro-Magnon and slaves in Egypt and all these amazing historical recreations that I got to write to and work with the editor. And the problem is that the editing was so aggressively fast, get to the next thing, that you never had a sense of the period that you were in, because they were so ready to leap to the next thing. Right. And so it can be hurtful in that it makes it so easy to just add extra bells and whistles that the thing becomes all bells and whistles, and you forget that, there's got to be some meat to this story here. You got to slow down for a second and absorb a beautiful shot. If a shot is spectacular, give the eye enough time to take it all in, especially with the high def and even 4K. There's so much information that the eye has to absorb that you can't quick cut the way you would before. You have to take notes from really the IMAX producers. You go to an IMAX film, they don't do a lot of rapid camera movements or a lot of rapid cutting, because you make the audience nauseous, because it's so overwhelming. And you've just got to slow things down and let the mind take it in. And to me, that's you know, you got to establish those kind of rhythms where if you do some rapid cutting montages or whatever, you got to corral them and keep them, you know, purposeful, and let the rest of the show just play out.
I don't think there were very many cuts in any of the Cinerama films because it was so difficult.
Well, yeah, right. That was
3 reels.
that, plus the fact that if David Lean spent 6 hours waiting for the sun to be in exactly the right position, you're not going to cut into that shot. You're going to leave that shot alone, or he'll have your head.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to do that. It's just you know, respect. The shooters are so good these days.
Right.
You know, you look at cable TV and a lot of these cable TV series, you know, some of these are low budget shows, and yet they look spectacular. The lighting is great because people know how to light so well, and the camera quality is so good. The dynamic range is so wide that they can bring up shadows and give a sculpted look to material that used to look like News at 11. You know, now for the same budget, they can make it look beautiful. It's really raised the visual standard, and because it looks so good, you got to give the eye more time to appreciate those shots.
Yeah, yet the average cutting rate is about 3 seconds.
Oh, MTV ruined everything. Yeah. You know, it really did.
I just watch TV now and I count the beats, and the average is about 3 seconds, even on shows that you would think would be more laid back, like cooking shows.
Exactly, and also the ratio of, it used to be about a quarter of in a typical documentary, maybe about a quarter of the running time would be the talking head.
Right.
And then you'd cut to B-roll and whatever. Today it's probably down to 15% or 10% talking head because it's considered boring. Yeah. You know, it's like you barely get the guy on screen and just long enough to get his credit up there, and you're on to cutting away from him because they don't want talking heads. They want B-roll, they want recrees, they want action, graphics, something.
Yeah.
And you know, now because it's simpler to create everything, they want more of everything, and that's a higher demand that the executives make.
Yeah, I'm noticing that with the other show, with the cooking show, is this show, you know, the cutting rate's fairly slow because we're really mostly focused on our guest.
Yeah.
And, you know, odd reaction shot or a cutaway to cover and edit. Classic stuff, really. But whereas the cooking show, I'm trying to be a little bit more modern about it, and it's pacey and cutting between different views of us, and you know, we're shooting most of it with 2 or 3 cameras.
Yeah.
And so we've got just those extra shots to work with.
Yeah. And really, I think it depends now. It's kind of like skirt hems. You know, it's sort of like it used to be that, wow, skirts are high this year, hemlines are low, and now it's everything. You know, whatever day you feel like you can wear anything you want, anytime you want. And I think with editing style, it's kind of the same way. You can go so fast now that it's too fast for some stories to tell. And so you really got to sort of pace it that's appropriate to the story. Yeah. And so there's some, like, you know, scary things that you need long, lingering shots and point of view shots and all that last a while, because if you're always cutting, you don't have time to build tension, you know. Whereas others, you can kind of tell that, okay, we're going to explore this deadly island of deadly creatures, and there's really nothing there. So what they have to do is, boom, slam, what was that, you know, and all that, and make it look like there's something exciting, and all they've got is the slash editing to make it, to liven it up, because otherwise it's just boring. Yeah. So, you know, that you have to fall back on the different techniques depending on your show and the demands of the particular show. And so there are some shows where the footage is really weak and editing just bails you out, and other shows where the footage is just really nice and rich. There was one series I supervised, producer and writer on about national parks. And we just sent a camera guy to shoot in 58 different national parks. And then we found cool music and rock and roll and whatever to slam these pictures to. And the footage is so beautiful because it's national parks. Yeah. You want to linger on some of these shots and everything like that. Right. Some of the national parks are kind of boring because the wildlife is great, but it's just, you know, empty fields and whatever. So you have to, you know, pick up the pace there. So you do different parks at different speeds and different kinds of music depending on how visually captivating it is. And you can sort of dictate it to that. Well, and you can also, I mean, a lot of interviews are done with a 2-camera coverage now, just so you have something to cut to. Again, part of that, we've got to keep the picture changing. You don't want just that same talking head. I used to do the safe shot and then do an extra, I like nice close-ups of the real intense moments. So we go back over the interview and have them do it again. Now you can get it all on the first pass, which is often the best pass, you know, for their emotion. Yes. Right. And you get 2 GoPros, which means you don't get 2 shots, you get 4 shots, wide and close of each. And then you got great variety, and that's a nice way to do it.
Yeah. The same with the cooking show, where we add into that, we add a DSLR because it's just got the bigger sensor and it's a nicer image overall.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things that has changed is that now in our iPhones, the camera in the iPhone is better quality than we could not afford 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's incredible.
Amazing. Yeah. Right. And it's a wonderful learning tool too. Because you can just go out and shoot the hell out of something with your iPhone, dump it into Final Cut, and cut it something together. It's like, hey, I can put that online and it'll pass. I mean, it's that good, And then so which must be tough for shooters, because I don't sell myself. I know the basics. I've been SLR photography for a long time, so I know what makes a shot look good, but I don't know all the nuances of the new video cameras. Right. So I always have I've always had a professional shooter with me whenever I work professionally. So I don't sell myself as that, but it must make tougher things for that, because I think people appreciate a great shot less than they used to. They figure, well, if it's properly exposed and in focus, I'm okay. And that must make it tougher for cameramen to specialize in just that field.
I think so. Yeah.
But and then again, there are other cameramen where you can't replace them, even if you got. I have a little underwater package for my iPhone, so I can film underwater.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And so if I go snorkeling or something like that, I get fish and all that kind of stuff. And you get it in slow mo, so you get slow mo underwater stuff. The problem is you can't see anything when you're under this, so you just have to kind of aim it and hope you get it.
Okay.
Whereas when I did this Shark Week show, I had an Australian cameraman, and he's from Melbourne, and he's the kind of guy where you drop him in front of a pod of whale sharks in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and he gets to watch them and film them as they swim by. He's that kind of guy. And so he filmed all our underwater shark attack stuff for the show that I did. And that kind of guy you still need. You still need somebody who just knows all the factors involved with underwater shooting, and then make the adjustments when you come back to the surface. And so there's still a lot of specialties to get the spectacular footage that you still need. GoPro's not going to do it.
No. It's just this. Once upon a time, there was only high-end production.
Yeah.
Back before there was electronic production, you could afford to shoot on film, 16mm minimum, or you simply couldn't afford to produce.
That's right.
Whereas now we can produce from $139 is the cheapest GoPro. I think at last count I have something like 9 HD cameras in our apartment.
Wow.
Once you include iPhones and iPads.
Yeah. Right. When you put them all together, sure.
Yeah, there's like 2 GoPros, 2 DSLRs, 2 iPhones and 2 iPads, all with HD video cameras in them.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, for documentarians, this must be a huge bonus going forward, because I was working on a project leaving Australia that was talking about this guy's being discovered, basically a triple threat young kid at 17. He got a 3 CD deal with Sony Universal just based on how experienced he was and how great he was. But the night he was sort of discovered, there is 0 visual coverage. Because we're talking early 1990s, so nobody had a digital still camera, and nobody was shooting film. Nobody has their phone cameras or anything like that. So there was, making a documentary that has that moment, all you're left with is talking heads and 2 or 3 people talking through the same situation and intercut them and do all that. But now, when the chances of not having 8 or 9 recordings of that, particularly as soon as anybody realised that he was really good out of the blue, people would be just grabbing their cameras out, and you could probably cut it in multicam.
Right, with iPads. Right, yeah, exactly. But you still need, that eye for it. What's going to distinguish people is just the talent. Again, painting has not changed in 500 years a whole lot, but there are people who can paint spectacularly and people who can't draw a tree. And the same thing is true with, I think, a lot of this, is that there was one show I was put in charge of, I won't mention the name of the show, or series, and I was the series producer and the writer, and they hired 4 producers to produce episodes under the series. But none of the producers had experience doing documentaries. They had done stuff like News at 11. They were EKG, or ENG, EKG. They were ENG guys. And as a result, everything they came back with looked like News at 11. You know, it just looked awful. And even the interviews of the talking heads. And so, and the series ended up crashing and burning because we didn't have enough people who knew what they were doing, unfortunately. And they had full professional crews with them, but they weren't, you know, like I said, okay, go down to this racetrack and film the race cars, you know, because we need it because we're doing a segment about NASCAR. Great. So he like points the camera right at this strip on the racetrack, and you see these blurs going by, foo, 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 and that's all you ever see. And I said, well, I can't see any of the cars. And he goes, well, they're going really fast. And it's like, well, you get them coming around the bends so you get to see the car, or you follow along and everything. Oh, well, yeah, I guess I could have done that. And it's like...
Yeah.
So, you know, you still need to know what you're doing.
You still do need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, because there's not much point having a lot of coverage with people with their iPhone cameras if all you've got is 20 copies of everything shot vertically. You can't use that.
Exactly. So you got to know, you know, it's like sex, you know. You can have the equipment, but you got to know how to use it if you're going to be any good.
Right.
But everything is like sex eventually if you can compare everything to that, yeah.
The question I usually wrap up every lunch with is, what change do you expect to see that'll in the rest of your career that'll have a big impact on your career?
Well, for a while, reality was looking scary because I don't really do reality that much. I don't do follow along. I do more pre-scripted documentary stuff. And reality eats up so much of the schedule that it's becoming less and less of a career for me to find the kind of things I like to do and want to do. And so for a while I was worried that reality was going to eat it all up. Reality seems to have peaked. Reality seems to have peaked a bit and is kind of maybe slowly degrading, you know, and on its way out. But it's going to be around for a while just because it's so cheap and convenient.
Yeah.
And because you still have a couple of big hits like Duck Dynasty or Kardashians or whatever. So there's always going to be that around. So maybe mine will...
We are pretending they're not scripted.
Yeah, we're pretending they're not scripted. Exactly. So the only difference between reality and documentary is the documentaries are interesting.
Says the documentary producer.
Says the documentary producer. So maybe there'll be a little bit of comeback for that, because now what used to be very logistically expensive, getting a crew out in the middle of nowhere or in these exotic places, now becomes a lot easier to do in terms of equipment movement, in terms of logistics and all these sort of things. So maybe that will make the more exotic travel and things like that more popular. I think that historic recreations, they don't like to do them because they're expensive, but again, those are getting cheaper. And with people used to feature quality stuff now on cable TV, there's kind of a demand for that. So I'm hoping that that's going to keep things going. I also see more of my work ending up online. You know, everything is multi-use now. So they want us to overshoot. So we have the trimmed down version for TV, and then a second more expanded version for online, so there's additional material. That's going to be a bigger part of the thing. And I think that more of what I do is going to be supplemented by just doing strictly online stuff. You know, whether it's even doing for ridiculously good money for ridiculously little work, shooting things like it's sort of the video equivalent of doing wedding pictures. You can shoot video of high-end real estate.
Oh, yes.
You know, and do lovely, you know, tracking shots and whatever of their properties. Drones. And drones. I have a drone. My girlfriend gave me a drone for Christmas, so I got a drone. I got to learn how to manipulate it now. And and shooting these great properties and put them up on high-end sites. They're willing to pay a couple grand to make a 2-minute video or whatever. You know, you spend a day shooting, a day cutting, done. And you know, that's good, like extra pocket money for between the freelance jobs that I do. So if you're not making tons of money doing the freelance jobs, those kind of options are becoming more and more likely. And so I think there's going to be more just online, there's going to be more of an online demand because the internet is just going to gobble things up, and there's going to be more demand for quality as we come down, you know, in the future. As with everything, Sturgeon's law is in effect. Sturgeon's law says that 90% of everything is crap. And so that's true whether it's cars, politicians, husbands, or video, okay? And so most of it's still going to be amateur crap, but if you're in the, you know, the competitive for the good stuff, that's going to be true whether it's going to be online or on the air. And I think eventually it's going to be a seamless thing. You'll watch TV online, you'll watch online on TV, Chrome TV and all that kind of stuff, and it'll be a sort of a seamless medium between the two. And that'll still mean somebody's got to shoot all that, somebody's got to write all that, and somebody's got to edit it, and they've got to do it in a way that makes it interesting and engaging and well researched. You know, you can't just go out and shoot crap and cut it together and not know what you're doing. So those basic creative elements are going to be there regardless. So you can make a typewriter or you can make a PC. You still got to be able to use the English language in a compelling way. And I think the same thing is true with the language of film.
And where can people find more about you, or how can they get in touch with you if people have watched here and said, I need a producer writer?
Well, my best thing is from my email, which is tqqq@att.net. I also have a website, trquinn.com, where I advertise a book that I wrote called What Do You Do with a Chocolate Jesus, which is a funny history of Christianity. It sort of gives you a walkthrough of the whole history of Christianity and of the development of the church and the role of religion in the creating of America, but it's done in a funny way as if The Daily Show did it. So it's a laugh out loud book that sort of deconstructs fundamentalist Christianity. So it's for a broad audience that sort of, you know, takes these pious guys that want to pass laws restricting what we do and sort of deconstructs what they're trying to do and makes it fun along the way. So I do that, and you can learn about that book there, or go on Amazon.com and find What Do You Do with a Chocolate Jesus, or you can go on YouTube and see samples of my stuff. Just look for Thomas Quinn 1000 and go on YouTube, and you'll find a website there with clips of shows that I've done.
Ignore the other 999 Thomas Quinns. Thomas Quinn 1000.
There's a lot of Thomas Quinns. It's a rare Irish name, I guess. But yeah, so I'm Thomas Quinn 1000, all one word, and you can find me there on YouTube.
Thank you, and thank you for coming to lunch, Tom.
I appreciate it very much, guys. It's great.